Hello, my name is Travis. I'm a PhD in philosophy of science from the University of California, San Diego, and I've been doing test prep for about 20 years, 12,000 hours teaching students, classes, some teachers. I am here to talk about the digital SAT. And the digital SAT reading is a challenge because the format does not allow for very good annotation, and it's very easy to lose track of one's timing and fall behind. So I'm going to be talking about those two issues primarily in the context of the digital SAT reading. And the math is by and large the same, but the reading has changed because the digital SAT only has one paragraph or very short passage of, say, 100 to 150 words with one question at a time. So there'll be a paragraph, sometimes a chart as well, with a question instead of one long passage with 10 questions, which was the previous format for both the SAT and the ACT. What I want to do is show you how to process the questions for yourself, because there are a number of questions on this digital SAT where if you think ahead of the game and don't look at the answers until you've really processed the hypothesis or claim or argument in your mind, then you'll have a much easier time selecting your answer choice. So a big part of the game is thinking for yourself. And I'm going to demonstrate how to think for yourself and annotate as you go through specifically the vocabulary questions, the arguments questions, where you can weaken or strengthen the hypothesis or identify the function of the argument, or you have to state the main idea. All of those you can write your own thought. The logical completions questions, where you can write what's going to logically complete the sentence. Again, that's about thinking through and assembling the question. And the transition questions, which are at the end of the section. So how do we process for ourselves? You should be writing your own thought first. So writing your own thought means that as you read the sentence, before you look at the answers, you highlight, because you'll just have a highlight option, and then you can type whatever your word is. So in this case, they say, it's by no means something to recognize the influence of Dutch painter Hieronymus Bosch on some other person's paintings. By the way, you don't have to memorize names as you go through. So I'm sure that Ali Banisader is a very important person, and I probably said the name wrong. But when you read through and you get a tough name, you can just say AB. So it's more important just to recognize the name and move on. So indeed, this person himself cites Boss as an inspiration. Some scholars have suggested that this poem, Gilgamesh, may have had a far greater impact on, okay, so there's a however statement that goes against the earlier statement. We don't really need to, we don't have to know that. What we have to know is that it's common for people to cite HB as an influence on AB's paintings. So if it's common to cite this person, then it would be by no means uncommon. It would be by no means strange, or it would be by no means unexpected to recognize the influence of the Dutch painter. The correct answer is going to be unimportant. Writing your own word is going to enable you to cross off the words that don't match. Usually you can cross off 2. So your goal is to cross off 2. And then sometimes you might have to plug back in. So cross off 2, then compare. That's the name of the game if you're thinking for yourself on the SAT. It's actually a lot faster to do this. So substantial definitely wouldn't work. Satisfying would not work. You'd have a choice between these two, and you might have to plug back in to make the decision. Because appropriate kind of sounds good. It is by no means appropriate to recognize the influence of Dutch painter HB on AB's paintings. It turns out, though, that if you read the rest of the sentence, appropriate has the opposite meaning. And so the last question standing is the winner. That's thinking for yourself. Don't look at the answers. Write your own word first, then cross off. That might sound very different from what you've been doing. That's okay. As a teacher, I struggled with this myself. And then all of a sudden I jumped 100 points. So I started getting 800 on SAT sections. And it was this process of thinking for the self. So here's another example. Which finding from these two people, again, that you could spend a lot of time pronouncing names, but from here on out, I'm just going to say the first letter. So from G or A's research, if true, would most directly support their claim. What I'm going to do is try to think through the claim and write our version of the claim before we look at the answers. And you might think, oh, that's a waste of time. Why would I do that? Well, I'm going to write like a 5-word summary of the claim. And what that's going to do is process it into my mind so that I have a reference point or a foundation before I start wading into the answers where I might get lost by all the different implications. If you haven't concretized your thought before you look at the answer choices, you run the risk of getting your thought pulled in 2 or 3 different directions, and you may, and probably will, lose track of the original passage. It's better to take the time and make sure you understand. Then you can see what's going to work as a possible answer. So it says black beans are a nutritionally dense food, but they are difficult to digest in part because of their high levels of fiber. So they're difficult to digest because of fiber. I'm going to highlight keywords as I go through. I tend to highlight about 1/10 of the words. Helps me to see the argument. I recommend you try it out. So there are compounds like raffinose or R stuff. They also contain A nutrients, okay, like tannins and some TIs, which interfere with the body's ability to extract nutrients. So they've got something that interferes with getting nutrients. In a research article, MG and GA from this university in Venezuela claim that inducing fermentation of black beans using lactic acid bacteria improves the digestibility. Okay, well, what's the claim saying? Our version is going to say something like fermentation makes beans more digestible. And that might also mean that they're probably less fiber if we were to look at that first sentence, right? Because high levels of fiber are kind of a problem. And apparently those A nutrients. So they're probably going to get rid of the A nutrients. So probably less A nutrients. If we really thought through the logic of the question, we might get to those two extra pieces. Not necessary, because when we look at the answers, we're going to see something that matches pretty clearly. This is not that hard of a question. Which one would most directly support? Well, let's see. When cooked, these beans contain more trypsin inhibitors and tannins. Isn't that a problem? If there were more of those, then they would not be digestible. That's the opposite. The beans contain less fiber, and when cooked, they also display less trypsin inhibitor. Oh, hey, that matches perfectly. There's the answer. It is a skill to practice, and that's some students will say, well, why would I want to do this? I should look at the answers. They're going to give me the right answer. Yeah, that's going to work about half the time. Then you get to a hard question and you're going to get stuck and waste 3 minutes or 5 minutes. So the reason we do this is because over time it pays off, but you got to try for yourself. This is what all the tutors around the world are doing. We're showing you how to think for yourselves on the reading. One more. Here's where we're doing a logical transition. Again, I recommend that you write your own word here. Why? Because you can get sold a word that you kind of like, but actually doesn't match. If you think for yourself, you've got less chance of getting sold by the test. They know how to make you think the word that sounds good, but doesn't mean the right thing, because they know that people map according to patterns. And so they just shift the logic a little bit, and then people miss the question. You have to think about the logic and write your own thought first. That's how you do better on the high level questions. In his 1925 book, The Morphology of Landscape, again, you don't need the name, the geographer C.S. challenged prevailing views about how natural landscapes influence human cultures. So prevailing views were challenged by this person. This person argued that instead of being shaped entirely by natural surroundings, cultures play an active role in their own development by virtue of interactions with environment. So cultures develop themselves. It sounds like the prevailing view is this part right here, because this person was challenging the view. What that would mean is that this blank part right here is something close to, for example, this person challenged prevailing views. For example, they argued that instead of being shaped by natural surroundings, cultures shape themselves with the environment. For example, or something close to that would work. And we go, well, does similarly work? Kind of. But this is more so the trap. You can kind of see it. It sounds good, but wait, finally, no. Therefore, not really. This would be too strong of a connector. This is more of a conclusion. Specifically, well, yeah, specifically works, but a lot of students would have chosen A. Specifically is going to match better with for example, and you can try it out and you'll see that specifically does fit. But the SAT is the master of deception, and they will sell you answer choices if you don't think for yourself. So the moral of the story is write your own answers down first on the questions where you can. It's not all of them in the reading. It's the vocab, the arguments, the logical completions, and the transitions. It's about 60% of the questions. The rest you can more so cross off, and annotation doesn't help too much. In habitats with limited nutrients, so what I like to do is highlight key pieces that stand out. Certain fungus species grow on the roots of trees, engaging in mutually beneficial relationships. I'll keep this part, that are known as some long word. In this symbiotic exchange, the tree provides the fungus with carbon, a nutrient necessary for both species. I'm just going to hold on to necessary. And the fungus blank by enhancing the tree's ability to absorb nitrogen. And the fungus, I would say, helps out in return, something like that. So I'm going to annotate and just type in helps in return. It does not take long to write your own thought. You just type it. Does it overreact? No. Does it reciprocate? Yeah. Does it retaliate? No. Does it deviate? No. Birds of many species ingest foods containing some word carotenoids. They're molecules that can be converted into feather. Oh, coloration in feathers. Interesting. The coloration tends to be especially saturated in the male bird's feathers, and because these things confer health benefits, so they're in the male feathers, and they confer health benefits that serve to communicate what is well known as honest signal of bird's fitness. Oh, okay. So if they have colorful feathers, they're more fit. Again, see how we're processing the sentence down to an understanding instead of all at once. However, some ornithologists and others have found that males in several species of this bird, don't need the name, use microstructures in their feathers to manipulate the light, creating the appearance of deeper saturation without necessarily having to maintain that diet. These findings suggest that some birds are lying, right? They're pretending. Logical completions are great because you just think through and write something down. Does that suggest that the male tanagers can engage in honest signaling without relying? No, it's not honest signaling because honest signaling would be if they're actually eating those foods. The feather microstructures may be less effective than deeply saturated feathers. That's not what we wrote. Scientists have yet to determine why they have a preference for mates with colorful appearances. No, we just anyway suggested they like the healthy ones. Tanager's appearance may function as a dishonest signal. Bingo. It's not that hard, but you have to put the pieces together. So the correct answer to 14 is delta. That's right. Earth's auroras, colorful displays of light seen above the northern and southern poles, result, broadly speaking, from the sun's activity. So the auroras come from the sun. Let's hold on to that first sentence. Blank, the sun releases charged particles that are captured by Earth's magnetic field and channeled toward the poles. These particles then collide with the atoms in the atmosphere, causing the atoms to emit. Well, those two sentences that follow the blank seem like a definition. So I would say, like, as a definition, or more specifically, is it similar? No, because we're defining, we're giving a definition. Is it nevertheless? No, that means in spite of, that means the opposite. Is it hence? Well, it could kind of be hence, but specifically is better in terms of demonstrating a more specific example. And that's the answer to 23. Usually we have 3 of these evidence questions. With these, students have demonstrated for me that you can just read the question and usually cross off at least 2 answers, but then you're going to have to go read the evidence to make a final decision. So the process for these is first read the question. Student wants to emphasize the duration, good to highlight what you're looking for, and the purpose of CNR's work. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish the goal, showing duration and purpose? At the museum, visitors can learn more about people who have lived there. That does not show duration and purpose. I mean, it shows purpose maybe, but not duration. They work to preserve culture who have lived since the 18th century. Well, that again is not the duration and purpose of their work. Since 2003, there's duration. They have worked to preserve the culture through their museums. Hey, that's duration and purpose. Influenced by traditions of West and Central Africa, the United States, 18th century, Gullah culture. That's just the culture that they're looking into. We got lucky on this one. It's just C. We didn't even have to read this evidence. That's a shortcut for these kinds of questions. If you carefully read the question, you can usually cross off 2 and sometimes 3 answers. So again, just to step back, what have I been demonstrating? As you go through, you think for yourself, you can see over and over that there's this compiling of information, right? It's like you get a sentence that you don't really understand until you finish it. You have to circle back and highlight this piece and that piece. Now you've got the sentence. Now you build the next step and you get this kind of pyramiding of your understanding, and then you can write what logically completes, or you can write the hypothesis and check the evidence, so on and so forth. And the more challenging questions tend to be from 9 to 13 in the advanced module. It's right in the middle. The other questions aren't so bad. You can think through them. There might be a tough logical completions. There might be a tough transition. So you might have to skip 1 or 2 of those. But if you're in the 700 zone, it's usually more like from 9 to 13 where the hard questions are. My privilege to share some of this information with you. I hope it's helpful. May it serve you well as you go through the test.